In the late autumn of 1979, the suburban sprawl of Southern California became the hunting ground for a pair of highly organized predators whose actions would redefine criminal depravity. Operating from a customized silver GMC van, these individuals embarked on a systematic campaign of abduction, torture, and homicide. The sheer calculation of their methodology caught law enforcement entirely unprepared as young women began vanishing without a trace. The architects of this campaign were Lawrence Bittaker and Roy Norris, who met while serving sentences at the California Men's Colony. Lawrence Bittaker was highly intelligent and deeply sadistic, while Roy Norris was compliant and harbored equally violent impulses. Upon their release, their mutual pathology synthesized into a lethal partnership, driven by a shared desire to exert absolute dominance over their victims. Their operational methodology earned them the moniker of the Toolbox Killers, a title derived from the standard household implements they used to inflict severe physical trauma. Pliers, screwdrivers, hammers, and ice picks were utilized as instruments of systematic torment. Lawrence Bittaker and Roy Norris approached their crimes with a clinical efficiency, selecting their victims with deliberate care and executing abductions with practiced precision. The first victim of their coordinated campaign was 16-year-old Lucinda Schaefer, who disappeared in June 1979 while walking near her home in Redondo Beach, California. Lawrence Bittaker and Roy Norris intercepted her, offering her a ride before quickly overpowering her. They drove her to a remote mountain location, subjected her to prolonged abuse, and terminated her life, concealing her body in a ravine. In July 1979, the pair struck again, abducting 18-year-old Andrea Hall near a highway in Monrovia. The escalation in their criminal signature became increasingly apparent as they refined their methods of control. Andrea Hall was subjected to the same systematic brutality, with Lawrence Bittaker taking the lead. The perpetrators felt an increasing sense of invincibility, believing their remote disposal sites guaranteed permanent anonymity. This growing overconfidence manifested in a highly specific and ultimately self-destructive decision that focuses on the extreme hubris of the offenders. Lawrence Bittaker insisted on documenting their crimes using a portable, handheld cassette tape recorder. This choice was not merely a means of preserving memories, but a physical manifestation of their desire to relive the absolute control they exerted over their helpless victims. The psychological profile of this hubris suggests that Lawrence Bittaker and Roy Norris viewed these audio recordings as prized trophies of their perceived superiority. They believed they had constructed a perfect, undetectable system of murder and took immense satisfaction in archiving their depravity. The tapes were stored securely, serving as a private library of torment that they assumed would never be discovered by investigators. In September 1979, the violence escalated further when Lawrence Bittaker and Roy Norris abducted two victims simultaneously. Jacqueline Gilliam, age 15, and Jacqueline Lamp, age 13, were taken from West Covina. Managing two victims required a higher degree of physical coordination, yet the perpetrators executed the crime with cold detachment. The subsequent abuse and murder of the two girls were also recorded on tape. The final victim of their brutal spree was 16-year-old Shirley Ledford, abducted in the early morning hours of Halloween, October 31st, 1979, in Hermosa Beach. Lawrence Bittaker and Roy Norris offered her a ride and quickly subdued her. The torture and murder of Shirley Ledford would be recorded in excruciating detail, later becoming the central focus of the entire forensic investigation and trial. During the late summer and autumn of 1979, California law enforcement agencies struggled to connect the disappearances. Because the abductions occurred across multiple municipal jurisdictions and the bodies were disposed of in remote mountain areas, detectives failed to recognize a pattern. There was a distinct lack of physical evidence linking the cases, and without a surviving witness, the investigation remained completely stalled. The breakthrough in the case did not come from a forensic laboratory, but from a critical lapse in Roy Norris's discretion. In November 1979, Norris confided in an acquaintance, William Gibson, boasting about the abductions and detailing the methods they used. Gibson, horrified by the graphic confession, contacted the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, providing detectives with their first viable lead. Detectives placed Roy Norris under close surveillance and apprehended him on November 20, 1979. Under intense interrogation, Norris's confident exterior quickly crumbled. Faced with the reality of his impending arrest and the potential for a capital murder conviction, he chose to cooperate with authorities to avoid execution. Norris provided a comprehensive confession detailing the entire timeline of their criminal operations. Norris detailed his partnership with Lawrence Bittaker, the use of the GMC van, and the locations of the victims' remains. Following this confession, police moved swiftly to arrest Lawrence Bittaker at his residence. A search warrant was executed on Bittaker's property and the van, where forensic technicians discovered physical evidence, including blood stains, hair fibers, and tools matching the injuries described by Norris. The most critical discovery was made during the search of Bittaker's personal effects, where investigators located the cassette tapes containing the audio recordings of their crimes. The recovery of these recordings transformed the investigation. Forensic analysts were tasked with the harrowing duty of listening to the tapes to verify their authenticity and establish a definitive timeline of the torture and murder events. The audio quality was remarkably clear, capturing the distinct voices of Lawrence Bittaker and Roy Norris as they directed their victims with a chilling lack of emotion. The tapes provided an immediate, unvarnished record of the final moments of Shirley Ledford, leaving no doubt as to the identity of the perpetrators and the premeditated nature of their highly coordinated criminal enterprise. The psychological impact of the audio recordings on the investigative and legal teams was profound. Seasoned homicide detectives and forensic pathologists were visibly shaken by the contents of the tapes. The raw reality of the torture was so extreme that the prosecution realized the presentation of this evidence in court would have to be handled with care to avoid traumatizing the jury and staff. The prosecution, led by Deputy District Attorney Stephen Kay, recognized that the audio recordings would be the absolute centerpiece of the trial. The defense filed numerous motions to have the audio evidence suppressed, arguing that the recordings were highly prejudicial. However, the prosecution successfully argued that the probative value of the tapes was unmatched, providing direct, indisputable proof of extreme cruelty. The trial of Lawrence Bittaker commenced in 1980 in Los Angeles, California. The courtroom was filled with media representatives and the families of the victims, waiting to see how the justice system would handle the horrific case. Roy Norris, having secured a plea agreement that spared him the death penalty in exchange for his testimony, took the stand as the prosecution's star witness. Norris detailed the inner workings of their partnership, describing how they selected their victims and how Bittaker took pleasure in recording their suffering. The pivotal moment of the trial occurred when the prosecution played the audio recording of Shirley Ledford's final moments. To preserve some level of privacy, the courtroom doors were locked and the public gallery was cleared before playback. The playing of the tape was a devastating experience. The raw audio of Ledford's pleas and the cold, mocking responses of Lawrence Bittaker filled the silent courtroom, stripping away any possibility of a viable defense. Members of the jury wept openly, while others sat in stunned silence, unable to look at the defense table. Even the court reporter had to stop temporarily. Throughout the playing of the tape, Lawrence Bittaker sat with an expression of complete indifference, occasionally smirking or doodling on a notepad. This display of unrepentant hubris only solidified the jury's perception of his absolute guilt. To complement the audio, the prosecution introduced forensic pathology reports correlating the skeletal trauma found on the remains with the sounds captured on the tape. This precise correlation between physical evidence and self-recorded audio created an airtight case that left no room for reasonable doubt. The defense's attempts to portray Bittaker as a passive participant were completely dismantled. The deliberate decision of Lawrence Bittaker and Roy Norris to record their crimes ultimately became their undoing, providing the state with a level of proof rarely seen in capital cases. Following a brief deliberation, the jury returned a verdict of guilty on all counts. Lawrence Bittaker was convicted of 5 counts of first-degree murder, conspiracy, kidnapping, and rape. The swiftness of the verdict reflected the overwhelming nature of the evidence. During the penalty phase, the jury wasted no time in recommending the death penalty, determining that Bittaker's actions warranted the ultimate punishment. In 1981, Lawrence Bittaker was formally sentenced to death and transferred to San Quentin State Prison to await execution. Roy Norris, in accordance with his plea agreement, was sentenced to life imprisonment. Norris was housed in a maximum security facility where his subsequent parole hearings were consistently denied due to the extreme gravity of his crimes and his active role in the murders. The legacy of the 1979 Toolbox Killers investigation remains a dark chapter in the annals of American criminology. The case is frequently studied by forensic psychologists to understand the dynamics of destructive partner relationships, where 2 individuals who might not have committed murder individually become capable of extreme violence when paired together, driven by a shared, escalating feedback loop of sadism. Both perpetrators eventually died behind bars. Roy Norris died of natural causes in February 2020, having spent over 40 years in prison. Lawrence Bittaker died of natural causes on death row in December 2019, spending nearly 4 decades in isolation. Their conviction stands as a testament to the investigators who ensured that the offender's own hubris became the instrument of their downfall.